And that's what this panel is all about. These folks have been, along with many of you, on a transition journey to try to, over time, integrate your investment practices and your institution's mission. Over the next 2 days, we're hoping that you'll have the opportunity to sort of tell everyone more about what your experience has been. If you are over on the right-hand side of the spectrum up on the wall, but these folks have, I think, done some good things. One of the jobs that I was given basically is just to kind of set the context from a fiduciary duty standpoint. I'm a lawyer and I work with a law firm that represents a number of institutional investors, both large and small, U.S. and foreign. And a couple of years ago, we used to quite regularly hear that fiduciary duty was a roadblock, which was preventing people from sort of beginning this journey of integrating their mission and their investment practices. So I'd be curious with a show of hands just to see how many of you are still experiencing fiduciary duty as a roadblock. That's great. There's just a few. As Barbara had said, a few years ago, most of the people in the room would have raised their hands because it was seen as quite an issue. One of the things that I basically tell our clients that have concerns around whether they can begin this journey to integration of their investment practices and their mission is that we, over the last couple of decades, have had the, I think, misimpression that fiduciary duty is merely just kind of a set of rules where this is exactly what you have to do. And the fact of the matter is fiduciary duties are fairly constant, but our understanding of fiduciary duty really changes and evolves over time as both our knowledge base in the investment community and the circumstances of the society and environment in which we live change. So the last time that we had a major transition in understanding of fiduciary duty principles was back toward the latter half of the 20th century. And in those days, I can recall when I was first starting out in the investment business, stocks, public equities, were a prohibited investment at a large number of institutional investors because they were viewed as being too risky and imprudent. It's hard to believe, for where we are now, that that actually was the accepted wisdom of the investment community and the understanding of what fiduciary duty as a legal concept required. Well, it took several decades to kind of move past that, but we did move past it and took a much more portfolio-wide approach to balancing risk and return and viewing individual investments in the context of how they fit into an overall portfolio. But the legal community basically established a couple of background statements in the restatement of trusts, which is sort of like the Bible for attorneys that do what I do. And you can see up on this slide basically that they really tried to establish guidance for us going forward to not get stuck in the sand. Things always change, and we have to keep up with change. And the good thing is over the last couple of years, we've started to see some of the regulators recognize that things have changed indeed. Last year, the IRS basically gave a notice that provided this guidance to foundations, which really applies across the board to both endowments and foundations because they really share the same principles of fiduciary duty underlying their investment approach. And in the pension fund area, the Department of Labor, in regard to private pension funds under ERISA, also confirmed basically that ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, can be material, and that they're proper components of a primary analysis of economic merits. It's not just a secondary thing. It shouldn't be treated with suspicion. So that's basically the context of, I think, what's helped to free up the movement toward the right-hand side of that spectrum. But the folks on our panel here have, I think, been movers well before that occurred. And I'd like to just kind of hand it over to them. Their bios are in your materials, but I'll just say that we do have two trustees from colleges, from college endowments, and a college president here today. So, gentlemen, I think we're going to start off with Dave down there, because you've got a microphone, right? Okay. Tell us, and then we're going to just kind of pass it down and get your story about your journey of your institution regarding ESG impact investment and how you approach divestment, kind of what started the process, who were the main stakeholders, and what sorts of challenges did you face, and how did you overcome them? That should just take a minute.
Or two. Hampshire was founded in 1970. It's in Amherst, and has always sort of had an orientation toward social justice as part of what it does. So its investment policy, and initially obviously a very small endowment, but now we're just under $50 million, has always been sort of geared in that general direction. Because of the size of the endowment, we invest through managers principally, not individual issues. So we're always picking at that level, not the individual stock or other security. In 2009, we had a situation come up which encouraged us to revisit our policy, and we really redeveloped our policy to be overtly and explicitly A, principles driven, B, positive screens, and overtly about ESG as principal drivers in the policy. That's the easy part. As we looked at it and started to, and sort of really sort of up our game on how we implemented it, we also had Jonathan Lash come on board as our president, who's a very devout but very practical environmentalist, and he asked the investment committee to assure us ourselves that we weren't invested in Arch and Peabody Coal and Exxon and Chevron. And we looked at that and we said, good news, we're not, but let's take it up a notch and really look at what we're invested in. So we really started digging into our portfolio and found that we had about just under 3% exposure to carbon-based stocks on a broad-based basis, sort of Bill McKibben's list as a sort of a rough proxy on that. And we said, okay, what can we do to move the needle on this? So we talked to our managers, we actually shifted a couple funds. There's some obvious challenges in that when you start looking at investing in emerging markets. But the bigger thing that became a challenge for us was that 18 months ago, the Black Lives Matter folks on campus showed up and said, great news, we want to make sure you're not invested in private prisons. So we've really had to look at this. We were all culturally aligned about this to begin with, but we've really had to look at it on an ongoing, thoughtful, engaged basis and really assess what our investments are as they relate to the college's mission on an overall basis. And that's been both a fascinating effort, and it's also been one we've used to further the educational mission, which is really about the kind of alignment that I think is important in an academic institution, where we've used it as an opportunity to talk to students about corporate activism. We had the Black Lives Matter folks say, hey, Whole Foods, buy some small part of their cheese from a group that uses private prison labor, and we want you to divest from Whole Foods. And we're thinking, gee, Whole Foods generally kind of a pretty good stock and pretty right-minded about these kind of issues. We said, why don't we use this as an opportunity to teach students about corporate advocacy? So it's really sort of much more about integration for us, and that's where the challenges have been, rather than sort of an alignment about, do we divest from Chevron?
So Becker was founded in 1784, and John Hancock and Samuel Adams signed the original charter of the institution. So I'm one of the few people in the world who's probably seen an original John Hancock, okay? Yeah, I've seen the charter. It's real. It's not what you see on TV, really. No, but seriously. So the way that we became engaged, really looking at 100% impact investing in for our endowment goes back almost a couple of years ago. Actually, around this time, about 2 years ago, back in 2014. We were having a discussion with Professor Muhammad Yunus, Nobel laureate, and he was looking to have the first sanctioned unisocial business center at a college or university placed here in the United States. At that time, there were only 14 in the world. January of 2015, we became the first. He decided that he wanted to put a unisocial business center at Becker College, so we became the first in the United States and the 15th in the world. Well, why Becker? If you look at our mission statement, it's all about global citizenship. We were the first institution in the country to create a baccalaureate degree in global citizenship. If you look at our mission statement, it talks about academic excellence, social responsibility, and creative expression. I tell all students that on a planet with more than 7 billion people, if you're an educated person, you're privileged, so therefore you have a social responsibility to give back. Subsequent to that, I met Paul Herman from HIP Investors, and he started talking to me about ESG, and I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer. We should be doing this. And naive me, I just went to the board and said, yeah, we should be doing this, and it took a little bit longer for us to get it through the process. But eventually, we ultimately adopted an investment policy that said 100% of our endowment would go into impact funds, and that was voted upon back in February of this year, and we're in the process of moving our endowment dollars over time. And I can talk a little bit later about some of the challenges and opportunities associated with that. But it fits so naturally with what we're already doing in terms of our mission. If you look at Professor Yunus in social business, where he talks about the importance of identifying real-world problems and creating self-sustaining for-profit businesses to alleviate those problems, it naturally fits within our DNA. And there were a number of challenges in getting the board to move along. And I think the biggest thing is education. Education. Naive me, I thought simply because I got it the first time I heard about it, so would they. Man, was I wrong.
So the path timeline for University of Dayton back in early 2013, the investment committee decided or started the discussion on what does our endowment and what it's invested in look like, and let's take a look at that. And we also looked at what alignment does it have insofar as the university's values. And so University of Dayton is a Catholic mid-size university. Endowment's roughly $700 million, Maronist order of priests. And when we started to look at just how things were being done and the whole ESG piece, we started to discover that it was pretty difficult in a lot of ways to address. The first thing was the Catholic screens, and that if you were invested in the Vanguard 500, which probably pretty much everybody in this room is invested in Vanguard 500, that there was, you're invested in things that you probably shouldn't be invested in, that there's no way align with your mission. So it was quite a process. Investment committees have maybe not that much of a diverse makeup in general. I'm not sure if most of you would agree with that or not, but that's what I've found. So it took, as you brought up, a lot of dialogue, a lot of education. And so what we looked at was, first off, the university, it believes in science. Okay, University of Dayton has a big research center. We do more non-medical, we're top 10 non-medical research dollars in the country. So we're strong believers in science. We believe that climate and action on climate aligned with that belief in climate, and also believed in our core Catholic Marianist beliefs. And to me, it almost, to simplify it is, if we believe that God, Jesus Christ created the earth, and this is his greatest creation, and how are we going to treat that creation? Are we as men going to own that creation and do with it what we see fit to profit from, or are we going to respect that incredible creation? So we started to look at what our dollars were doing and how that aligned in that core Catholic, how it aligned with that core Catholic belief. And the first thing that came up was the fossil fuel investments. And so we just started to discuss the whole divestment piece. And this was extremely controversial back in 2013. And Dan Kern, who was the president at the time of University of Dayton, a wonderful man, really, really wanted to see us divest. He had done his PhD thesis on labor rights in the mining industry in South America. So we started to realize how climate science and climate change was connected with human rights and Catholic teachings. And so even though there were members of the investment committee that were extremely conservative and thought climate change was just a made-up kind of hokey thing, they were strong Catholics, and they believed in core Catholic teachings. We also looked at our duties as fiduciaries. And I had someone come in from McKinsey, so an independent, highly regarded consulting firm, and do a presentation on the risks in being invested in stranded assets. And the whole potential carbon bubble, fossil fuel bubble that's out there. Most of these fossil fuel companies, they're not taking what we discovered, they're not taking any write down for any kind of carbon tax, any kind of consequences of having to leave, according to most scientists, 70 to 80% of their assets in the ground. So this might be a material change in their balance sheet. So for the most part, undisclosed. So as a fiduciary, we're supposed to be paying attention to those kind of things. So had a lot of dialogue, and we finally got to the point in May of 2014 that the investment committee and the full board voted unanimously to divest. The divest piece was really the easy part. The invest piece was the next part. And that, in so many ways, is the more difficult part. Performance is always brought up. But I look at it, and I said to the investment committee, and I said, listen, we're going to have to work harder. Our outside consultants are going to have to work a lot harder, but we can do this. Okay, this can be done. So if you get through my background is in the financial markets, and if you get through a lot of what the naysayers say about, oh, you can't do this, or you can't do that, or you can't do this, and you really question them on why you can't do it, the answers are not really that compelling why they can't do this, and provide market returns. So you're doing your duty as a fiduciary. You're working for market returns, and you now have integrity around the mission of your institution. So we are 2 years into this, and I think that the university feels very good, somewhat taking a lead on this, and being one of the first ones to divest from fossil fuels, and to also, as a lot of other organizations are doing, are now working on the investment part.
Robert, I got a question for you. If you're moving to 100% impact investing, how much of a hit on returns are you expecting to take?
We're actually not expecting to take a hit on returns at all. So when we introduced this to the board, many of them were under the impression, well, if we are going to do impact investing, therefore returns would be compromised. And, I kept trying to explain to them that that wasn't the case. But until I said, this is really more like an addendum to our policy versus a total replacement of the policy. And an addendum in this sense, if we have a 12-quarter rolling average with the expectation of returns of 4%, that we want to continue to have that 4% plus have impact. So the returns are not being adversely impacted at all, and based upon at least the numbers that we've seen so far, and we're just in the process of changing over, but when we look at historically the things that we are looking at investing into, we think that had we done this 5 years ago, the returns, in fact, would have been higher.
Well, I think we'll probably hear more about the return analysis of ESG investing over the next couple of days. One of the things I'd like to ask all three of the panelists is what your experience at your institutions are around the relationship between the investment office or the investment committee and the university. I know Tony talked about the lead wall between the two of them. Is that still the case? Did you overcome this lead wall, break through it? What gives?
We're very different about that, actually. We've made a point, the Black Lives Matter folks insisted with us that we be, they asked that we be fully transparent about what we own, and we said, of course. So we also, Hampshire has a mechanism, it's called CHOIR, it's a community, the Committee at Hampshire on Investment Responsibility, where it's the community's voice into the investment committee about what we invest in. They don't have any power, they are merely advisory, but there's a specific governance mechanism at Hampshire that provides for that kind of input. So again, we thought that consistent with mission about education and consistent with being intellectually honest, we made a commit to be fully transparent about what we own. That's up the game for us as an investment committee because now people challenge us about what we do, but I'll have that. I think that's a great result.
For us, at first, it was a huge wall because they weren't going to have it. This ESG stuff, they're like, we don't get this. One or two of them kind of sort of got it, but they didn't get it to the point initially where they were like gung-ho like me, let's go for it. So I had to systematically take a step back, and it took about 6 months of just educating them about the positive attributes of ESG and how it could have a real great impact on returns. And it wasn't until, I think it was August of last year, we were in a meeting, and one of the committee members said, this governance thing, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Now, this is a very bright person, CPA, sits on the board of a couple of banks and that sort of thing. And I said, well, maybe you've heard about This little global company that's had a few problems is called Volkswagen. I said, if governance structure had been a little bit different, they would not ultimately be taking a hit on their value. And today we see, someone mentioned at our table, Wells Fargo and what have you. So and you could see his eyes just lit up, and it's like he had an epiphany. I got it. So from that day forward, I just start pulling out real world examples related to the E, the S, and the G with real companies of what was happening in real time. And as soon as I did that, the wall came down very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. But it took me quite a while to get to that point and understand that was the best way for me to explain it.
Yeah, I guess how I would look at it is, how can you have lead walls? I mean, there are, I think Tony brings up a good point, but for the people that put them up, so your mission statement and your core values, they only go for this part of the institution, but for this part over here, we're going to put up a wall, and then we don't have to pay any attention to, those things are kind of a pain, to actually have to have some integrity around. So then we're going to do this over here, because, I mean, it comes down to, okay, I mean, is it really any different than to say we need to make money at any cost, doing any harm? It's everything is out the window. It's regardless, as long as we make money, because we're going to give some more scholarships to these kids. So it's kind of like, does that really compute? So it doesn't to me. So I think that if an institution, I mean, why be a fiduciary in an institution that has no integrity around its mission? I mean, what's the point? Okay, you can get free lunches other places, So, so yeah, mission statements, core Catholic values, core moral values, they have to go across a whole institution, and really, the arguments from the financial consultants, from the trustees, from the CFOs, from whoever, not to invest in an intentional way, they're really weak if you really call them on it.
Let me ask another question about your time horizons and how you evaluate both the financial performance and the social or mission performance of your endowments foundations. Are you looking at that on an annual or a quarterly basis or over a decade? What's the right time horizon?
Okay. Well, the short answer is all of the above. The longer answer is, we do a quarterly investment committee meeting and we look at what's going on, but we obviously take a longer view. In the investment world, things, one quarter does not a story tell. So we also view the institution, we're making a really big push, and we've got two very dissonant tensions at Hampshire. Hampshire gets 94% of its operating revenue from tuition, room, and board. So we are actively working right now to try to really redevelop and enhance our own sustainability as an institution, part of which means growing the endowment. The endowment also supports the rest of the college's operations, so you've got two tensions there about keeping the money in the endowment or growing it so that you have it for a longer-term view and a longer-term orientation towards making and enabling the college to do what it does over a multi-generational time period. So you really got the whole spectrum that we look at. But in terms of that, we're clearly not weighted towards the short end of the spectrum. We're clearly weighted towards the longer end of the spectrum.
We are too. It's pretty much the same thing, and we're very much tuition driven, just as you are. We're at 96%, and part of what we see with this impact policy is hopefully we can grow our endowment because there will be individuals who have an affinity to these types of things and will see us as one of the opportunities to do that.
So at Dayton, we look at it monthly. We have an outsourced CIO model. So we have a local firm from Chicago, DeMayo Schneider, who is our financial consultants. And we have 4 to 5 investment committee meetings a year. So we're tracking this, monthly, quarterly, yearly. There's a lot of data, Nakubo data, to see how you match up against your peers. So it's, and really probably the place Dayton has struggled the most over the last couple of years is as we've divested, if we would have divested quicker and more thoroughly, we would have performed much better. So it's been that kind of environment, I think, for the fossil fuel industry also.